Mellart, who first excavated Catalhoyuk, interpreted the site as evidence of a Neolithic bull cult intertwined with a mother goddess religion. One celebrated artifact is the seated woman of Catalhoyuk, believed to be from around 6000 BCE, a baked clay figurine of a full-bodied female seated on a throne flanked by feline armrests. Many scholars view this as a representation of a fertility or mother goddess akin to earlier Venus figures, and a possible forerunner to later mother deities. In the same room as these figurines, bull horns and other wild animal images were found, hinting at a mythic pairing of a great mother and a bull, even in Neolithic imagination. This pairing would recur in Near Eastern myths. For example, later Hittite and Hurrian myths feature the bulls Seri and Huri, who accompany the mother goddess of fertility, and in Canaanite lore, the mother goddess Asherah was associated with a divine bull. At Catalhoyuk, we see the prototype, walls alive with bull imagery and clay figurines of powerful female figures, paving the way for the sacred bull and mother goddess motifs that persist in the Bronze Age. Another important symbolic practice of this period was ancestor veneration. Like Jericho, Ein Ghazal, and others, people buried their dead under their houses, later retrieving certain skulls to plaster and paint them with lifelike faces. These plastered skulls, dating from around 7000 BCE, have shells inserted for eyes and modeled features, suggesting the living kept them as revered relics. This early form of ancestor worship implies a belief that the deceased could still influence the living, an idea that would evolve into the cult of ancestors and tomb offerings in both Egypt and Mesopotamia. In Egypt's pre-dynastic era, which is put before 3100 BCE, would see people continuing to bury ancestors in their homes or village cemeteries with grave goods, and later Egyptians would make food offerings to the dead, echoing the Neolithic respect for forebearers. Similarly, Mesopotamian texts from the 2nd millennium BCE describe rituals to feed ancestral spirits, the kispu, an institutionalized version of the practice that may trace back to these early plastered skulls. By honoring ancestors' remains, Neolithic people forged a spiritual link across generations, a tradition that likely informed later emphasis on tombs, mummies, and afterlife cults along the Nile and Euphrates. Technologically, this period saw the full domestication of plants and animals, a defining transfer of knowledge from the highlands into the future cradles of civilization. The Fertile Crescent, encompassing Anatolia, Levant, was a hub for the first farming. Wild grasses were cultivated and slowly bred into domestic incorn and emmer wheat and barley, while wild goats and sheep were tamed in the Zagros and Levant by 9000 to 8000 BCE. By around 8500 BCE, people in Upper Mesopotamia and Anatolia had also domesticated the formidable wild ox, the Bos primigenius, giving rise to the first domestic cattle. Genetic studies suggest that all modern cattle descend from as few as 80 aurochs domesticated at this time in the Near East. Because these developments did not remain confined in their points of origin, farmers and herders migrated and traded, carrying the
Excellent. Let's break it down into two parts. Basic timeline of archaeological evidence for ritual sacrifice. This timeline focuses on animal, and sometimes human, sacrifice as evidenced archaeologically, not just textually. Date proc, site, region, evidence, notes. 9600 to 8000 BCE, Göbekli Tepe, Turkey. Animal bones in ritual enclosures. Debate, ritual feasting versus sacrifice. No cut marks pointing to clear ritual slaughter. 7500 to 5700, Çatalhöyük, bull horns, bull crania in shrines, symbolic bull reverence but no clear sacrificial context. 7000 to 6000 BE Jordan, plastered human skulls, goat remains, possible ritual offerings, debate over sacrifice versus ancestor cult. Charged 4000 3000 B, Iraq. Altars, burned bones, early Mesopotamian cults, likely included animal sacrifice. 2500 to 2000 B, Egypt, Saqqara, Abydos, animal necropolises, e.g. bulls, ibises, ritual butchery tools, bull and ram cults sacrificed and mummified animals. 2000 to 1500 B, Mebla, Ugarit, Syria, cuneiform texts plus animal remains at temples. First clear combo of textual material evidence of animal sacrifice. Till 1000 BC Levant Israelite sites, e.g. Tel Dan, Megiddo, Jerusalem. Burnt offering altars, animal bone heaps, temple architecture, correlates with biblical descriptions of whole burnt sacrifices. Just 1500 Greek and Etruscan sites, e.g. Olympia, Rome. Altar platforms, cut burned bones, votive inscriptions. Evidence of structured public sacrificial rites. 500 BC to 300 CE. Second Temple, Jerusalem, Roman temples, stone altars, drainage channels for blood, matching texts, clear large-scale animal sacrifice in urban temples. Ritual offering versus ritual sacrifice archaeological approach. What's the difference? Term, definition, archaeological sign. Ritual offering, a gift or dedication to a deity, might include food, drink, incense, or animals, not always killed. Votive objects, buried goods, intact animals, altars. Ritual sacrifice, a deliberate killing of a being, usually animal, sometimes human, to transfer it to a god. Cut marks, burning, blood drains, dismemberment, context of temples or altars. All sacrifices are offerings, but not all offerings are sacrifices. How do scholars identify sacrifice archaeologically? Key evidence types. 1. Faunal remains, specific animal species, e.g. lambs, bulls. Age, sex selection, e.g. only unblemished young males. Cut marks indicating ritual slaughter, e.g. throat cuts. Burning pattern.
Who's that? We've got incoming. I require backup.
Yes, you are largely correct. Ritual animal and often human sacrifice appears across nearly all ancient human civilizations and cultures, with organized religion, from Europe to China to the Americas, often independently. The near-universal presence of sacrifice suggests it's a core religious instinct, a way to mediate between human and divine, to ward off chaos, affirm group identity, or offer gratitude or atonement. Sacrifice across civilizations, global survey. Ancient Europe, Celts, ritual human sacrifice, e.g. bog bodies, animal offerings to rivers and gods. Greeks, animal sacrifice central to civic religion, e.g. oxen at the Panathenaea. Romans, extensive animal sacrifice, human sacrifice in early and extreme cases, e.g. vestal violations, post-disaster rituals. Norse, sacrifice blot of animals, and occasionally humans, e.g. at Uppsala Temple for Adam of Bree. Ancient Near East, Mesopotamia, animal sacrifice widespread. Texts describe detailed rituals, some evidence of royal or servant burials, e.g. Ur. Canaanites, Phoenicians, animal and child sacrifice, e.g. Tophet at Carthage. Israelites, codified animal sacrifice in Torah, human sacrifice explicitly condemned, though stories like Isaac show its deep tension. Ancient Egypt, rituals involving bulls, rams, birds, mostly animal sacrifice. Human sacrifice debated, early dynastic tombs may suggest retainer deaths. India. Vedic religion. Sacrifices, yajna, were central, especially horse, ashtar, goats and bulls. Human sacrifice appears in some early myths and fringe practices, but generally less emphasized. China, Shang Dynasty 1600 to 1046 BCE, clear evidence of large-scale human and animal sacrifice to ancestors and deities. Zhou Dynasty and later, animal sacrifice becomes more codified, human sacrifice fades. Texts and oracle bones confirm both practice and ideology. Africa, West African traditions, animal sacrifice, e.g. chickens, goats, still practiced in Yoruba and Vodun. Ancient Nubia and Ethiopia, some tombs show signs of servant burials and possible sacrifice. North Africa, Phoenician influence, e.g. child sacrifice at Carthage. Indigenous Americas, Aztec, famous for large-scale human sacrifice to feed the sun god. Animal sacrifice also common. Maya, human and animal sacrifices, e.g. captives, bloodletting. Inca, child sacrifices on mountaintops, capacocha, plus llama and alpaca offerings. North America, less centralized, but some evidence of ritual killings, e.g. Hopewell culture burials, Mississippian mound offerings. Australia, Aboriginal Australians stand out as a major exception. Highly spiritual culture centered on the dream time, but little to no evidence of organized animal or human sacrifice. Their rituals involved song, dance, initiation, and spiritual connection to land, not blood sacrifice. So why is sacrifice so universal? Sacrifice is about mediating with unseen forces, gods, ancestors, spirits. It reflects a deep intuition. Life costs life. To a
Sector weather alert. A large sandstorm is approaching. Sector weather alert. A large sandstorm is approaching.
Oh, good. You're back. For many millennia, at the time, I believe the most have not fortunate. Before it, in reply, they were indeed the young emperor.
Back again. I can teach you no more. Arakeen may have a seasoned trooper or two willing to take.
I've been thinking about kinds and the testing stations. There used to be a dream on this planet that it could be something more. I think that is why Kynes sent me that letter. I'm an uncommonly good botanist. I'm not boasting. And why else would Kynes want me? There are dozens of better options in the field of... That's the thing, I just don't know. But there might be a way to find out, if you'll help me with another task. I need you to deliver a report of my progress to my... And while you're there, I need you to convince him to give me Here, take these Shigawire reels. They contain the details of my audit thus far. As for Cyprian Io, he was holding court at the Seleucid Bull, an officer's bar, when I last saw him. Look for him there.
Another slack-jawed peon come to gawk at your betters. From whom? A fellow planetologist, you say? And you've come from the academy? Oh, yes, him. Yes, yes, Portavoy can take those for further study. And how was Derek? Is he... Kynes? The old planetologist. What does he want with Kynes? Oh, I see. I see what he's doing. He's trying to he wants to show the Emperor that he's a better choice for planetologist. Well, it will. And you return to Derek and inform him that his request is... Another slack-jawed peon come to gawk at your... From whom? A fellow Oh, yes. Yes. Poor Tavoy can take those for... Such a shame. I mean, excellent.
Welcome. Would you like to... How much Stellaris would you like to
You're back. No one said the path is easy, but you appreciate that, Adept. You are breathing, and they seek a rogue Bene Gesserit? Here, on Arrakis. There is no. They seek a rogue Bene Gesserit to be apprehended and returned to the Sisterhood's care. Doubtful. Sister Mesa is the last living member of the Akazi royal line. While it's certain that her forbidden research has alienated the Sisterhood, even acknowledging Mesa's presence here would be damaging. When House Moritani was hunting down her family one by one, the Sisterhood went to... And I know for a fact that the Imperial Archives have Sister Mesa. Even acknowledging her existence for a kill contract would expose the Sisterhood's machinations. I do not know, but if my presence is known here, then I may be out of time.
the knowledge and the actual breeds of crops and livestock outward. By 7000 to 6000 BCE, farming had spread west across Anatolia into Europe and east into Iran. Notably, it also spread south into Egypt. Archaeological evidence indicates that the Neolithic culture of the eastern Mediterranean reached the Nile Delta and Sinai by roughly 6000 to 5000 BCE. Grains like wheat and barley, which were first domesticated in the Levant, appear in Egyptian sites, like in the Fayum Oasis, and in the Delta by 5200 to 5000 BCE. Everything points to Levantine farmers migrating into North Africa, introducing agriculture to native groups who until then were hunter-gatherers and pastoralists. just like everybody else across the entire globe was, up until this revolution of farming and domestication which grew out of the Anatolia-Levant region. And so the result was Egypt's own Neolithic revolution, a necessary precursor to pharaonic civilization. Along with plants came animals. Domesticated sheep, goats, and cattle were present in Egypt by the late 6th millennia BCE, clearly an import from Asia, and thus the very economic foundation of ancient Egypt, its wheat fields and cattle herds, owe a debt to the pioneering farmers of Anatolia and the Levant. And by the time of the first Egyptian kingdoms, around 3000 BCE, that's 2,000 years of being exposed to this, now the Nile Valley was populated by long-established farming communities whose crops, including wheat, barley, and flax, and livestock like cattle, sheep, and goats, all had Near Eastern origins. This cross-regional transfer of domesticates also influenced cultural attitudes. For instance, the early high value placed on cattle in Egypt as a form of wealth and status likely reflects cattle's introduction as an exceptional new resource millennia earlier. The Neolithic reverence for the bull in Anatolia may have traveled alongside the animal itself, possibly seeding ideas that would later blossom into Egypt's bull deities, like the Apis bull of Memphis and the celestial cow goddess Hathor. By 4000 BCE in pre-dynastic Egypt, bull imagery already features in iconography. The Narmer palette famously shows a bull trampling an enemy. It's linked with and symbolizes royal power. This continuity suggests that as domesticated cattle spread, so did a spiritual reverence for them, a reverence that Neolithic shrine builders at Catalhoyuk and Jericho would have understood well. And it all stems from the practical goods. Cattle provide so many resources to humans, from fresh milk, from cheese that can be stored longer, meat which can be just grilled up or dried to also last longer, to the urine being a disinfectant, cow manure being excellent as fertilizer, and its skin can be turned into leather. It's just such a resource-dense animal, and it provided such an obvious boon to any culture that got their hands on these domesticated cattle, and it was like a godsend, even if it was purposely bred by mankind. You can see why it was so natural for all these groups to develop an intense reverence for the cow. Spreading civilizations, 5000 to 3000 BCE. During the Chalcolithic and early Bronze Age, the 5th to 4th millennia BCE, the influences of Anatolia and the Levant on their southern neighbors became more pronounced. In these centuries, formerly small villages grew into large towns and early cities in both Mesopotamia and Egypt. But their developmental trajectory was boosted by innovations coming from the north and east. One clear example is in architecture. The tradition of building on high places and creating artificial mounds evolved into the practice of raising temple platforms. In southern Mesopotamia's Ubaid period, around 5500 to 4000 BCE, communities began constructing important buildings on raised mud brick terraces. This may have been inspired by the long-known concept of the sacred high mound, the tel, common in northern Mesopotamia and Syria. By the Uruk period, about 3500 BCE, the platform had grown taller. At the city of Uruk, a massive, multi-terraced platform known as the Anu Ziggurat was built around 4000 BCE. The whitewashed temple of Uruk, the so-called White Temple, was sitting atop the high terrace by at least 3500 BCE. In essence, Mesopotamians were turning their flat, alluvial environment into a man-made mountain, a trend directly foreshadowed by the Tels of the north. This link is more than conceptual. Mesopotamian mythology held that gods dwelled on mountains, specifically the eastern highlands visible from the plains. So Mesopotamian priests built stepped platforms to elevate their sanctuaries and bring the mountain to the city. The Department of Ancient Near Eastern Art at the Met notes that by the end of the 4th millennium BCE, enormous mud brick platforms had been built at multiple Mesopotamian sites, likely supporting temples on top. And by the mid-3rd millennium, these became huge step structures called ziggurats. The very word ziggurat comes from Akkadian zikkuratu, meaning a height or pinnacle. This architectural form, a towering staged rectangle, finds its earliest ancestry in the layered settlements and stone and earth edifices of prehistoric Anatolia and the Levant. We can see a continuum from the Tell of Jericho to the Ziggurat of Ur. One is a natural accumulation of sacred settlement over time, the other a deliberate imitation of a sacred mound, constructed to be in this place set apart and closer to heaven. Both arose from a shared cultural impulse to build upward toward the divine. In Egypt too, the idea of an elevated, sacred structure took shape under possible influences of older models. Pre-dynastic Egyptians initially buried their elite beneath low earthen mounds, essentially tumuli that marked important graves. By the early dynastic period, circa 3100 to 2700 BCE, these earthen burial mounds were formalized into rectangular mud brick platforms called mastabas, which is the Arabic word for bench. Each mastaba was a flat-topped mound covering a tomb chamber, and it closely resembles the silhouette of a natural tell or platform. It's important to understand that before the invention of true pyramids, the tombs of Egyptian kings in the first dynasty at Abydos were buried under mud brick mounds. The nobles' tombs were mastabas. The practice parallels the Near Eastern burial mounds and suggests a common architectural language which is called higher is holier. Egyptian architect Imhotep, when designing the tomb of King Djoser around 2650 BCE, took the mastaba concept and stacked a series of smaller mastabas on top, creating the step pyramid, which is Egypt's first pyramid. The step pyramid at Saqqara can be seen as a grand culmination of incremental ideas. It is literally a series of mastaba mounds placed on top of each other. In spirit, it also connects to the idea of the primordial mound in Egyptian mythology, the Benben, the first land that emerged from chaos, and what the sun god would first stand on. That mythic concept may well have grown from the visual reality of mounded towns and tombs that dotted the prehistoric landscape. By the time of Djoser, the Egyptians had made the leap from mound to true pyramid. And we know that kings were laid to rest under the mastaba, just like we saw in so many other regions, whether it be mounds for kings in Anatolia, or building upon layers of previous settlements, all which had their families built under the floor. And so the pyramid was not a sudden invention in isolation. It was the next evolutionary step in a long tradition of mound-based funerary architecture. You could even call Djoser's step pyramid a stone tell for a divine king. Just as Mesopotamian ziggurats were cosmic mountains for the gods, both these and the Egyptian pyramids were artificial mountains, and with the Kemites it was their god king, the pharaoh who was both human and divine. Astronomical alignment hinted at in Jericho and Göbekli Tepe also became increasingly sophisticated as civilizations grew. The tendency for orientating sacred structures to cardinal directions or celestial events is strongly evident by 3000 to 2000 BCE, with the Great Pyramids of Giza right in the middle of that around 2500 BCE, are nearly perfectly aligned to true north-south, east-west, showing an observational precision likely inherited from long tradition. Determining true north may have involved sighting the circumpolar stars, something that would require generations of skywatching knowledge. Some researchers have speculated that an echo of early star veneration persisted in Egypt, like the star Sirius, or as they called it, Sopdet, was critically important to the Egyptian calendar, as it would herald the Nile flood. And at Göbekli Tepe, there is a controversial claim that certain pillars might align to the appearance of Sirius around 9000 BCE. So while this remains unproven, the suggestion highlights a continuity in what's called attention to Sirius, what would be the brightest star in the night sky for these people, and that's why it's worshipped for thousands of years by all kinds of different cultures in this region. Temples in Mesopotamia were often oriented to cardinal directions, and later on some Hittite and Levantine temples were aligned to solstices or equinoxes, showing this obsession with astronomical awareness. The winter solstice alignment, recently discovered at Karahan Tepe, the sister site of Göbekli Tepe, suggests these early builders carefully tracked the sun's cycles. By the Bronze Age, the science of astronomy became a hallmark of Mesopotamian civilization. The Sumerians and Babylonians recorded the movements of Venus, the moon, and other constellations, tying them to mythology. It seems the first steps towards science were taken under Neolithic skies by people who began aligning stones with the solstice sun and stars, setting a precedent for the sacred astronomy in later ziggurats and pyramids. Echoes in Egypt and Mesopotamia, 3000 to 2000 BCE. By around 2000 BCE, the civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia had reached majestic heights, the former in the Middle Kingdom, and the latter under dynasties like Ur III and Old Babylon. In their fully formed cultures, we can discern many echoes of the Anatolian and Levantine Neolithic. Looking at their religion and mythology, both civilizations placed extraordinary emphasis on certain symbols, many of which appear to have prehistoric pedigrees. Like mentioned before, the bull is a powerful, sacred animal in both regions. In Mesopotamia, the storm god Adad, or Hadad, was symbolized by a bull, and artwork shows gods wearing bull-horned headdresses as a mark of divinity. The Sumerian hero Gilgamesh battles the ferocious bull of heaven sent by the goddess Ishtar in the Epic of Gilgamesh. This myth of a celestial bull wreaking havoc likely descends from a much older narrative framework venerating the bull's might. In Egypt, bulls were literally worshipped as gods, the Apis bull at Memphis being the best known example. From the early dynastic period onward, Egyptians identified particular perfect bulls as incarnations of the deity Ptah, and later Osiris, pampering them in life and mummifying them in death. The Apis cult's antiquity is uncertain, but the very concept of deifying a bull has parallel in the prehistoric bull cults of Catalhoyuk. As domesticated cattle became central to survival, ancient people projected divinity onto them, a tradition carried forward and amplified by Kemetic priests. Even Egyptian writing hints at this legacy. The hieroglyph for the concept of power was the bull, and the word Ka, vital spirit, was written with a sign of upraised arms that may be symbolizing the bull's horns. Some researchers even hypothesize that the iconic Ankh symbol, the sign of life, may derive from the shape of a bull's thoracic vertebrae. Whether or not this specific theory is correct, it underscores a perceived connection between bovine imagery and life force that is throughout Egyptian thought, a connection that reaches far back into the Neolithic when cattle first came under human care. The great mother goddess of prehistoric Anatolia also finds later incarnations. In Mesopotamia, the great goddess Inanna, later Ishtar, and Ninhursag carry aspects of fertility, warfare, and kingship, complex evolutions of the primal mother archetype. Ishtar notably was often depicted with lions, a mistress of animals motif reminiscent of the Catalhoyuk figurines flanked by felines. Yet she also had associations with the planet Venus and shepherded the bull of heaven in myth. This blending of the feminine divine with bull symbolism again echoes the Neolithic pairing of bull and mother goddess. In the Levant by the late Bronze Age, the goddess Asherah and the god El were likewise envisioned with bull imagery. Clay figurines show Asherah with bull horns on her headdress, and El was called Bull El, father of the gods. The Hittites of Anatolia, circa 1600 to 1200 BCE, inherited Hurrian myths of a mother goddess, Hepat, and her consort, the storm god Teshub, whose chariot was pulled by sacred bulls named Sari and Huri. This is all in the same area, and we see that Hittite area includes bull standards and depictions of bulls alongside goddesses, directly traceable to the sacred bull tradition at least 8,000 years old, coming from the same area where cattle were first domesticated and all cattle across the world today can trace their ancestry back to. Even in Minoan Crete and the Aegean, which was intricately tied with Egypt and Near Eastern cultures, the bull and a mistress of animals feature prominently, showing how widespread and long-lived this motif was. And even while the traditions of mound and platform building reached their zenith in the pyramids and ziggurats around 2000 BCE, the lineage was forever remembered. Mesopotamians maintained that their ziggurats were imitations of mountains, homes of the gods. One ziggurat in Babylonian lore, the Etemenaki, often associated with the Tower of Babel story, even carried the Sumerian name meaning House of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. The idea of a cosmic pillar or axis mundi, the center of the entire world or cosmos, this idea was already present at Göbekli Tepe, where T-pillars might have symbolized supports between heaven and earth for those ancient worshippers. And likewise, the Egyptians of the Middle Kingdom still venerated the notion of the primeval mound. In temple theology, the inner sanctuary was said to be built on the spot of the first mound of creation. At Heliopolis, the Ben stone, which is in the shape of a small pyramid, symbolized that original mound. And each pyramid, with its sloping sides, can be viewed as a stylized sacred hill. And we see that around 2050 BCE, Pharaoh Mentuhotep II built his tomb at Deir el-Bahri as a terraced structure on a natural hill, with a small pyramid or mound on top. This can be seen as a deliberate fusion of the pyramid idea with a natural mountain, closing the conceptual loop that began in prehistory with worship on high hills. And by 2000 BCE, the interconnectedness between these regions was ever growing more direct. Traders and migrants traversed the Near East, and knowledge always flows with goods. Middle Bronze Age Mesopotamian cylinder seals depict motifs like winged gatekeepers or tree of life symbols that some scholars trace to earlier Syro-Anatolian imagery. In Egyptian Middle Kingdom tales reference goods that come from Syrian cities, so they're writing about contact with these areas. And so we have images, written material, and just existing physical objects that must have come from far-off regions. And so through these exchanges, all these ancient civilizations were influencing each other, even if the percentage of people that actually traveled to faraway lands was very small. You could imagine 90% or more would have never traveled outside of their area, would have never left Kemet or Babylon, but the traders, priests, and kings were the cultural trendsetters and the ones that were in contact with other cultures. The Fertile Crescent's early innovations, farming, settled life, construction, symbolic art, all formed the base upon which Egypt's pyramids and Mesopotamia's epics were built. When we admire the smooth precision of the Grand Pyramid or the grandeur of Ziggurat, we are beholding the culmination of ideas born on the hills of Anatolia and the plains of the Levant. And so in our chronological sweep from the end of the Ice Age to the dawn of written history, we find that the foundations of Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilizations were laid in the Neolithic Anatolia and the Levant. These often overlooked influences include tangible practices, building in stone, raising mounds, aligning constructions to the skies, perhaps most importantly, the domestication of wheat and cattle, as well as more intangible ideas like religious symbols and mythic themes. The world's first temple at Göbekli Tepe set the precedent for spiritual architecture that echoes in the temples of later ages. The stone tower of Jericho, the first of its kind, prefigured the form and function of the pyramids and ziggurats as communal projects tying earth to heaven. There had to be people keeping up a tradition of skywatching over multiple generations, thousands of years, and which paved the way for precise celestial orientations of Giza and Babylon. Specific motifs, the bull, the great mother, the sacred mountain, the ancestor spirit, all germinated in Neolithic societies and peaked in Pharaonic and Sumerian religion. As we trace this continuum chronologically, the height of Egyptian and Mesopotamian civilization, around 2000 BCE, appears not as an isolated miracle, but as the flowering of seeds planted thousands of years earlier by peoples that are often forgotten. The Anatolian hunters who carved lions on megaliths, the Jericho villagers who built a tower to track order in nature, the Katahoyuk families who honored bulls and goddesses. These early innovators are the true ancients upon whose shoulder the so-called ancient civilization stood. Remember, even at the later date, if you put Göbekli Tepe around 8,000, that's still 5,000 years before the ziggurats and pyramids. They are as far from each other as we are to the pyramids. And so the pyramids and ziggurats, for all their grandeur, carry in their stones the memory of humble hilltop sanctuaries and mud brick tells. And so if we appreciate these deep influences, we gain a richer understanding of how human ingenuity and the seeking for meaning, our religious ideas, all evolved in unison, from the first settled hearths of Anatolia to the splendid temples along the Nile and Euphrates. Thanks for watching, and please hit that like button, I really do need your help. Subscribe so we don't get lost in the algorithm, and I hope to see you all in the next one. I already have written the scripts for the Ben symbolism, a deep dive on the Ankh symbol, and the mystery of the red-haired mummies in China. Thanks for watching, hope to see you soon.
Here are the cities founded by the Etruscans. Today, a quarter of Italy's population lives in them. According to myth, even Rome was founded following Etruscan rituals. The last kings of Rome were also Etruscans. The Romans adopted many aspects of Etruscan society, including their social, political, and military organization, as well as their arts and crafts. Etruscan religion also had a strong influence on Roman beliefs. Even the Latin alphabet is just a slightly modified version of the Etruscan one. Through Latin, the Etruscan language has made its way into our own. Here are some English words that come from Etruscan. Yes, Sergio is an Etruscan name. It comes from the patrician Sergius family, which also had Etruscan roots. But who are the Etruscans? Where do they come from? Why are they still remembered, and why did they disappear? Let's figure it out together. Herodotus believed the Etruscans were migrants from the Lydian kingdom in Asia Minor. Indeed, there are clear parallels between Etruscan culture and the civilizations of the ancient Near East. But there are also contradictions. For example, if the Etruscans came by sea, why are there no Etruscan settlements along the coast? And if they were newcomers, why did they use the Greek alphabet instead of bringing their own script? Moreover, modern genetic studies show that the ancestors of the Etruscans and those of prehistoric Asia Minor split as far back as the Neolithic period, thousands of years before the rise of the Etruscan civilization. Dionysius of Halicarnassus, a historian from the 1st century BC, argued that the Etruscans were native to Italy. For a long time, this idea was dismissed as fiction, possibly even a political move to flatter Octavian Augustus, whose family claimed Etruscan ancestry. But today, evidence increasingly supports the idea of cultural continuity between the Etruscans and their early Villanovan culture of the Iron Age. In fact, the only reliable way to tell a late Villanovan burial from an early Etruscan tomb is the presence of an inscription. If there's writing, it's Etruscan. No writing, it's Villanovan. Other theories exist too. Some scholars suggest the Etruscans came from the Alps or migrated from the island of Sardinia, but these ideas remain speculative at best. Archaeology shows that the Etruscans expanded from Tuscany northward toward the Alps, not the other way around. As for Sardinia, its ancient inhabitants built massive stone towers called nuraghi, probably for religious purposes. But nothing like these towers exists in mainland Italy, which weakens the Sardinian origin theory. The most convincing explanation is that the Etruscans emerged from the local Villanovan culture, gradually shaped by contact with the Phoenicians and Greeks, and possibly even intermixing with them. There's even a reflection of this blending in Roman legend. King Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, one of Rome's early monarchs, was said to be half Etruscan and half Greek. It's no coincidence that the Villanovan culture began transforming into what we now call Etruscan during the 9th and 8th centuries BC, right when the Phoenicians and Greeks first started sailing to Italian shores. The Etruscans are wrapped in a mantle of mystery, mostly because their language still hasn't been fully deciphered. They wrote using the Greek alphabet, and every year new studies claim to have finally cracked the code. Some by fringe theorists, others by serious scholars. The problem, none of these translations agree. Different researchers interpret the same texts in completely different ways. We do know a few things. The Etruscan language is not Indo-European, and it appears to have an agglutinative structure, meaning words are formed by stringing together multiple roots, prefixes, suffixes, and affixes. Around 400 words have been identified with some confidence, but beyond that, our understanding is limited. One major challenge is that despite thousands of surviving inscriptions, most are short and repetitive. They're typically epitaphs like "Here lies Sergio," or votive offerings such as "I, Sergio, dedicate this sacrifice to the god Tinia." Only 8 known texts contain more than 50 words. The most notable of these is Liber Linteus, or Linen Book, a rare, lengthy Etruscan text that somehow survived because it was repurposed as mummy wrappings in Egypt. We know that the Etruscans had linen books, but only one had survived. In the 19th century, a Croatian officer named Mihailo Baric purchased a mummy and its sarcophagus while in Egypt. The mummy eventually made its way to the Zagreb Museum. There, researchers noticed writing on the linen wrappings. For years, no one could identify the language, until the early 20th century, when it was finally recognized as Etruscan. Somehow, an Etruscan linen book had ended up in Egypt, where a local embalmer had cut it into strips and reused it as mummy bandages. The text turned out to be a religious calendar. We can make out references to recurring rituals, the names of gods, and the names of months. But the book still hasn't fully been deciphered. Hopes for unlocking the Etruscan language soared in 1961, when archaeologists discovered the Pyrgi tablets, thin gold sheets inscribed in both Etruscan and Phoenician. It was a potential Rosetta Stone. But there was a catch. The texts aren't word-for-word translations. The Etruscan version is much longer, which limits how much we can learn from comparing them. 2 languages are believed to be related to Etruscan. The first is the language of the Ratian tribes, who lived in the Alps. Ancient authors often referred to the Ratians as mountain Etruscans, suggesting a shared origin or cultural connection. The second is the language once spoken on the island of Lemnos in the Aegean Sea. Interestingly, the ancient Greeks used the same word, Tyrrhenians, to describe both the Lemnians and the Etruscans. The problem is that we understand Ratian and Lemnian even less than Etruscan. The surviving texts are extremely limited, and most are just a few words long. Scholars hope that future archaeological discoveries, especially longer inscriptions, will help us finally decipher these ancient languages. It's also worth noting that during the late Bronze Age, around the 12th century BC, the urn-filled culture spread into the Italian peninsula. Some researchers believe this movement may be linked to the distant roots of Etruscan civilization. In Italy, this culture is usually referred to as the Proto-Villanovan culture. Its most distinctive feature was its burial practice. The dead were cremated and their ashes placed in biconical urns. By the 10th century BC, this culture had evolved into the Villanovan culture, the direct predecessor of the Etruscans. Villanovan communities were typically small, housing about 3,000 to 5,000 people, and were built on flat, elevated areas like hills and rocky plateaus for easier defense. They continued the tradition of cremation and urn burials. As time passed and the population grew, social hierarchies began to emerge. This is clearly reflected in the archaeological record. Some tombs were far richer than others, filled with weapons, ritual objects, and finely crafted pottery. Then, around the turn of the 8th and 7th centuries BC, the Villanovans began to establish contact with the Greeks and the Phoenicians. Trade followed. The Villanovans exported food and iron ore, and in return imported luxury goods, bronze and iron tools, pottery, and art objects. It's around this time that inscriptions in the Etruscan language began to appear. The language likely existed long before, but it hadn't been written down, at least not in any form that has survived. Burial customs changed too. Cremation gradually gave way to inhumation, the burial of bodies rather than ashes, marking a significant cultural shift as the Villanovan era gave way to the fully developed Etruscan civilization. Small tribal settlements on hills gradually transformed into well-fortified cities, perched on plateaus and mountaintops. With this urbanization came the rise of crafts and the arts. At first, Etruscan artists simply imitated the works of Greek craftsmen. But everything changed in the 6th century BC, when the Persian Empire invaded Ionia. A wave of Greek refugees fled across the sea, and many of them settled in Etruria. Their arrival gave Etruscan art and craftsmanship a massive boost. By the end of the 6th century BC, Etruscan art had reached a level comparable to that of the Greeks. In fact, Etruscan pottery is often so similar to Greek that only mineralogical analysis of the clay can reliably distinguish the two. At the same time, the Etruscans developed a distinct ceramic style of their own, bucero. This style of pottery was made by adding soot to the clay, and once the vessel was fired, it was polished until it gleamed like metal. The result was elegant, black, and almost bronze-like in appearance. Interestingly, both the Greeks and later the Romans described the Etruscans as incredibly promiscuous and decadent. Rumors of Etruscan promiscuity mostly stemmed from the unusually high status of women in their society. Unlike in Greek or Roman culture, Etruscan women dined and drank wine alongside men, something the Greeks and Romans found shocking, even scandalous. But in reality, erotic themes in Etruscan art are no more common than in Greek art. The Etruscans also loved music and dance, activities that the stern, patriarchal Romans considered frivolous or even indecent. Their reputation for decadence was further fueled by everyday habits. The Etruscans ate hot meals 2 or even 3 times a day, while the early Romans prided themselves on eating only once. The Etruscans were master metalworkers and jewelers, achieving extraordinary levels of detail and refinement. Take, for example, this tiny pendant depicting the river god Achelous. Isn't it stunning? Look closely. The beard is crafted from minuscule grains of gold, each less than half a millimeter in diameter. Such delicacy speaks volumes about the skill of Etruscan artisans. The arts of painting and sculpture also flourished in Etruscan civilization. This is especially evident in the rich necropolises found near the Etruscan cities. The Etruscans built elaborate tombs, essentially full-scale houses for the dead. Inside, they placed sarcophagi, along with a wealth of objects the deceased might need in the afterlife. The tomb walls were often beautifully painted and decorated, and the entire structure was covered with an earthen mound, or tumulus. Etruscan military craft also developed significantly. They fought many wars, not just against their neighbors, but also among themselves. Yet these were rarely wars of conquest. Their main goals were to capture trophies, steal cattle and harvests, and take slaves. The Etruscans had little interest in occupying foreign cities.
Here they come, yo. Here they come. You can Venmo this, or you can Venmo that. You can Venmo this.
From early on, they also engaged in piracy along Italy's western coast. By the 7th century BC, Etruscan piracy had grown so bold that Greek and Phoenician ships avoided sailing beyond Sicily and Sardinia. The Etruscans are the inventors of the naval ram.
Yeah, that's a pretty
Broadly
good.
speaking?
Broadly speaking, yeah. Some of the, I guess the exegetical support that's brought forth for it, I have questions and
Right.
objections about. Yeah.
And the fight started just because Dr. Agnew is just a big meanie.
I am a big meanie.
Stop picking on me.
I'm just a keyboard. I'm just a keyboard warrior over here, just with a
Keyboard
microphone and a
jihadi.
dream. Yeah. I like that. I just want to say that this began as like me and Josh, as Josh offering to have a conversation like on video, and now the thumbnail is like debate. What are we fighting about? I was like, this escalated quickly.
It's for the
That's what we do. That's what we do. We escalate things. We make it worse. So here's what's gonna happen. Than's gonna moderate. I'm gonna dip in and out of this throughout because I have some other stuff to do. But I should be listening the whole time. I'm gonna dip back in and out to do super chats. So get super chats in, and then when I come back in, I will stop the fighting, put them both in their corners, and we'll do some super chats, and then we'll let them tear each other to pieces again.
Yeah.
So
with the love of Christ, like.
No, tear each other to pieces.
Yeah, I mean, so, yeah. I mean, I will escalate things.
What is this about? Why'd you bring Dr. S on when I haven't gotten paid? I don't get it. Did you owe someone money, Dr. Josh?
I hope not.
Apparently, money. So, and Mike, the gig is up. I have it under good authority with that you are an active member of Bethel Church. Don't deny it or I challenge you to Mubahala. Well, I challenge you to Mubahala, West Side. I will challenge you on that because you will fail. I am not a member of a church that is not in Arizona. So there. All right. So, Fan, you can take over here. Listen here, gentlemen. I want a good, clean fight. No ad hominems. No your mama jokes. No demanding to know where the other person lives so you can fly him to your area and challenge him to a boxing match. None of that, sir.
That will for sure not happen.
We will be hosting a physical fight at some point, but it's just not going to happen this time, right here.
And also, in the words of Jordan Peterson,
don't be a smartass. Seriously, I mean it. Conduct yourself properly.
So that's it. So yeah, I'm gonna duck out, come back in for super chats. If we get 50 super chats, both Josh and James will shave their heads. So
that's true.
Get those in now, and they will shave their heads.
It's true.
And all that beautiful hair will disappear. But anyway, take it over, Than.
Yes. All right. So, I mean, I'm just gonna leave this up to you guys because there's so many places you can go. I'm not gonna. I think we kind of decided no, it's not gonna be timed opening statements or anything like that. I'm not really planning on hopping in unless I think you guys are speaking past each other or maybe the audience needs a clarification on something. I was just gonna leave it in your guys' hands, and like I said, I'll hop in and out as needed. Does that sound like a good plan?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, so I think me and Josh talked about like him taking about 5 minutes or so to present kind of the outline of his position, and then I'll take about 5 minutes to do the same, and then we can have a free-flowing discussion. And then I think the idea was like I would bring some of my objections up, and then we would respond to them, and then later he would turn around and take swings at me. I think that was the general format.
Yeah, whatever works for me, man.
Great. Okay. Yeah. So okay, I'll start off then. Yeah, so hopefully this will be, the audience will be happy. I don't have a PowerPoint to bring up. But yeah, just sort of as much as I can in an accessible format, as succinctly as I can. I want to express the position of conciliar Trinitarianism. That's sort of the terminology I'm using for the understanding of the Trinity that I affirm. Now, why I call it conciliar Trinitarianism is because I believe that it is the specific teaching that is expressed by the 7 ecumenical councils. So that's the councils stemming from the first council of Nicaea to Nicaea II in the 8th century. And so what you have here are these 7 councils, and really the first 2 councils are the main ones that sort of define what the doctrine of the Trinity is, sort of the boundary marks of what we can say when we speak about the Trinity. And then the other councils after that, the other 5 councils, they sort of just further emphasize the importance of Nicaea and Constantinople. And so they reaffirm its authority. And so that's why it's carried on into those councils. Now, the specific teaching of conciliar Trinitarianism just focuses on 2 main points. And you can sort of just even put this in a sentence, which just says that there is one God, the Father, and that there are two other relationally distinct divine persons, the Son and the Spirit. So there's one God, the Father, and there's two other relationally distinct divine persons, the Son and the Spirit, who are homoousios with the Father. That just means that they are of the same nature, substance, essence. Now, these three terms, substance, essence, and nature, I personally do not take them to be synonymous. That's why normally I'll say and or, but just because I'm presenting this at a basic level, it's a lot easier just using them interchangeably. But actually at the metaphysical level, substance would be different from nature, and that would be different from essence. And so, so what I'm just saying though is when we look at what homoousios means, it just means the sharing of, in this specific sense, the same substance of the Father, or the same nature of the Father, or the same essence of the Father. So we're going to sort of interchange with those terms, even though generally, if we were going to be more specific in our language, they would be actually more, there'll be distinctions to draw between those terms. So just reiterating it again, that there's one God the Father, and two relationally distinct divine persons, the Son and the Spirit, who are homoousios with the Father, which means that they are of the same substance, nature, or essence as the Father. Now, when we sort of break this down, and we can sort of now break it down into these two sort of sections. So we say that there's one God the Father, and that just means that there is one sole source within the Trinity. So the Father is the unsourced source of everything else. So he doesn't come from anything. He doesn't depend existentially on anything. So his existence isn't derived from anything else. But he gives existence to everything else ultimately. So everything ultimately comes back to the Father. Either necessarily it comes back to him with the Son and the Spirit, or through his causal will with creation. But everything ultimately comes back to him. And so I use a term of fundamentality, and there can be other terms that you use, but it just means that the Father is the fundamental divine person. So he's the explanatory stopping point for all of reality. And that's why we can call him the one God. And then when we say that there are two other divine persons, and we name them the Son and the Spirit, what we are saying is that there are these two other persons who are related to the Father, because one of them, firstly, is eternally generated by the Father, that's the Son, and the other one is, we can use a term that's sort of used by some people, which just means spirated. So the Spirit comes from the Father. He's spirated. So there are these two beings, the Son and the Spirit, who eternally come from the Father. And so they're relationally distinct, as it says in the statement I gave before, because the Son is the begotten one, and the Spirit is the one who proceeds, or he's spirated by the Father. And so that's how we sort of distinguish between them, between their relations of origin. And they're divine in the exact same sense as the Father. So there is no ontological hierarchy. It's not that the Father is ontologically greater than the Son and Spirit, because he communicates, he gives all of his divinity to the Son and the Spirit. And so they share, that's why they're homoousios, they share in the nature, the substance, and the essence of the Father. So all that the Father has when it comes to his omnipotence, his omniscience, his perfect goodness, is also had by the Son and the Spirit. And there is also a singularity when it comes to the will. The will of the Father is enacted by the Son and the Spirit. There is no independent wills when it comes to the other two divine persons. So just to summarize what we've said, there's one God the Father, because he's the fundamental divine person, the explanatory stopping point for all reality. And there are two other divine persons, the Son and Spirit, who are relationally distinct, and how we distinguish them is because of their relations of origin. The Son is the one who's begotten the Father, and the Spirit is the one who's proceeding or spirated by the Father. And they're homoousios with the Father because they share in his divinity. They have the same nature, substance, and essence as the Father. And I believe that is the conciliar teaching, which also has precedent in the scriptures. It's grounded on the scriptures, but it's fully explicated through the 7 ecumenical councils.
Your workflow is important to us. Please wait indefinitely.
With Monday.com's intuitive work management platform, you have the power. Not IT, not admins. You're in charge. So you can tailor work exactly how you love to do it. Whether you're managing tickets, marketing, projects, or sales, Monday.com gives you a holistic solution for everything work-related. For example, you can add custom fields.
All right.
Okay.
James,
Yeah,
are you going to take that?
I'm not sitting down. I won't.
Like, I
yeah.
basically think he just like insulted your whole entire family history.
I'm pretty sure he insulted my ancestors. Actually, when Than said that he was going to escalate things, he was not, I guess, kidding. No, so I think there's going to be so I'll kind of give my spiel. So, everyone here affirms the divinity of Christ, and everyone here is a Trinitarian, just to make that clear, right? So we're all on board with a lot. The question is, when it comes to the divinity of Christ, how do we understand it? The way I see it, there are broadly three different ways that I think we can conceptualize the divinity of Christ and his relationship to Yahweh. We can understand Jesus as being identical to Yahweh, we can understand Jesus as being external to Yahweh, or we can understand Jesus as being internal to Yahweh. And most approaches to Jesus and the Trinity that I see, they seem to collapse into one of these three categories to me. Now, Josh and I both reject the idea that Jesus is identical to Yahweh, as that would collapse the persons of the Trinity. Where we differ is that Josh takes the external option while I take the internal option. Josh says that the Father is identical to Yahweh, and that the Father causes or grounds the existence of an external divine person, which is the Son. The Son, in this view, is external to Yahweh because he is not identical to Yahweh, and he's also not a part of Yahweh. So in contrast, I take an internal approach. I agree that Jesus is not identical to Yahweh, but I think Jesus is internal to Yahweh, or rather a part of Yahweh. I hold to what people lovingly refer to as partialism. And while this term gets thrown around and sneered at in dismissive ways, I contend that it's probably the best way for viewing and thinking about the Trinity. And I may alternate between referring to my position as an internalist and a partialist position. Now, I see two plausible ways to understand the partialist position. One option is to say that Yahweh is the Trinity, right? Under this view, the Father, Son, and Spirit taken together collectively, that's what Yahweh is. Yahweh is just all of them. Jesus is part of the Trinity is Yahweh, so Jesus is part of Yahweh. Pretty simple. However, there is a second plausible way to understand the partialist position. One could actually agree with Josh that Yahweh is identical to the Father, but instead of saying that the Son is an external person generated by the Father, one could maintain that the Son is a part of the Father, is internal to the Father. And this would resemble, I think, what we see in early Christian writers like Tertullian or Theophilus, who describe the Son as God's logos, who was always intrinsic within him, and then God sped out, and so on and so forth. But anyways, so something worth noting about the internalist position is that it imposes far fewer theological commitments on the person who adopts it. So for Josh's model, for his model to work, one essentially has to affirm the eternal generation of the Son. In contrast, from my view, that doctrine, you can take it or leave it. Like, my view will work either way. Similarly, Josh's external model requires the claim that the Father is identical to Yahweh. And I don't agree with a lot of Josh's biblical arguments for this, and I'll be challenging him on that, I think, shortly. But even if Josh were correct on that point, it wouldn't necessitate the externalist position. One could still be an internalist and say that Jesus is internal to this person of the Father who is Yahweh. And in pointing out these differences in theological commitments between our models, I'm not yet offering a critique of Josh here. I'm just pointing that out so everyone is on the same page. As Christians, I think the major question we should be asking is, how do these two models compare in light of the biblical data? Does the Bible support one view over the other, or does it leave us with not enough data to decide? And it's here I'll go ahead and lay out some of my cards on the table of what I hope to discuss today. I believe Josh's model relies on theological commitments that can't be found in Scripture. I think that he has overstated the scriptural support that he can kind of muster to support his position. In contrast, I think there's a lot of biblical data, especially in the Old Testament, that strongly supports the idea of the Son being internal to Yahweh. So my contention today is this. I think at best, none of Josh's proof texts succeed, and the Bible fails to support his model over mine. At worst, I think the Bible might actually support my view or burn against his. And let me conclude by stating that one of my theological commitments, let me just state this clearly, I think as theologians, we should start with the Bible, understood in the context of its original audience and authors, and build their theology from from the ground up. It seems like Josh starts with the creeds and the councils, and then he takes what they say and tries to make it go back into scripture. And this is a difference of methodology, but I personally, I start with the Bible and I build from the ground up. And I think in general, this is crucial, because if we begin with a theological model that we're committed to, and then we go to scripture to defend it, I think we just inevitably end up shoehorning our theology into the text. So I suspect most of us have had encounters with people who, when faced with biblical passages that contradict their theology, they do some interpretive invention. So anyways, that's a brief introduction to my position. I have several specific areas that I'd like to bring up with Josh about his arguments and how he justifies his model, but I will go ahead and pause here and see if there's any remarks that need to be made before we get into
that. So I was trying to keep a track record of broad categories of areas of disagreement, and these are the 4 ones that I see, and let me know what you guys think, if that's okay. Do you have something you want to say quick, Dr. Zijwadi?
No, I'm cool. Yeah,
okay.
That's fine. Yeah,
so I think one thing we'll need to do is go over this internal versus external issue. I think that's going to be something that especially for the audience, that we'll have to unpack. I think you brought up an interesting point, James, in your opening statement, because you kind of alluded to the explanatory flexibility of your model. Your model can, you're arguing that it can take into account many different ideas of the relationship between God the Son and God the Father, where, correct me if I'm wrong, Sijuadi's model is kind of necessitating a particular view. We want to go. The third one would be like biblical data, and the fourth one could be epistemology of theology and theological methodology. Do you guys think that's a broad taxonomy that's representative of the disagreements?
I'll let Josh speak first, since I just heard.
Yeah, no, that is, you've highlighted great things. So yeah, I think that's sort of some major distinctions between us. For me, really, I'm just open to go with whatever you want to do, however you want to attack this. And yeah, so Fan and James, over to you guys, how you want to sort of navigate.
Okay, so I'll say this, and then if there's nothing else, I'll let Dan hop in, and then I'll go to kind of my first thing that I want to bring up. So some of those things are relevant, but so for instance, a difference in methodology. If you have someone who comes from a Protestant background and you have someone who comes from a Catholic or like Orthodox background, their epistemologies or the methodology when it comes to theology is going to be different. And in this conversation, I think something like that is probably going to take us off into the weeds. So like as far as what's the best epistemology, I'm fine to just say, okay, as far as, let's maybe focus on what does the biblical data say, what does the patristic data say, and then maybe set aside the issue of like what's the hierarchy we give those. I was just setting that forward as kind of my methodology, that way people would understand where I'm coming from and focusing on it. So yeah, I would just say that, and then Than or Josh, if there's anything you guys want to say, I can bring up my first, I can bring up kind of the first area that I want to kind of press you on.
Yeah.
I am resisting the temptation to just include myself into the conversation since it's between you two. So I'm just here to moderate.
Okay.
So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, so if it's okay with you, Josh, what I'll do then is kind of like what we talked about. So I don't want to hit you with a whole lot of like different points, and then you have to play catch up. So I've kind of broken down my objections into sections that I can articulate in 5 minutes or less. And so if it's okay with you, I'll maybe talk for about 5 minutes or less for my objections, and then I'll let you take whatever time you feel you need to kind of like address them, because I know if I talk for I've done enough TikTok responses to know you can make a lot of errors in 5 minutes, and maybe you need more time to unpack them. So then I'll do maybe 5 minutes, and then you take the time you feel you need, and then after you do that response, we can then go free flow. Is that pretty good?
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay, cool. So kind of one of Josh's main arguments that I want to press on is that the New Testament identifies the Father as Yahweh. So this is the first area I want to challenge. So when Josh argues for the Father being identified with Yahweh in the New Testament, he cites several scriptures in which the Greek word theos, which is translated to God, is used in connection with the Father. And he usually cites these verses and claims that they identify the Father as Yahweh. However, I want to pause and examine the underlying assumptions of this argument. Suppose I was to ask him, hey Josh, why does referring to the Father as theos entail identification with Yahweh? Suppose I pointed out that theos was used at this time to refer to all sorts of beings who were not Yahweh. It referred to pagan Greek gods, to humans, to Satan, so on and so forth. Why then should we assume that the use of theos necessarily refers refers to Yahweh and has this identity, right? Presumably, Josh might want to respond by saying, well, James, you silly goose, while theos was used broadly, we have to look at how a first century Jewish author would use that word. And when we do that, we see that theos for first century Jews was primarily a way of referring to Yahweh. For them, Yahweh was the only true theos, right? So when they refer to the Father as theos, or as the only true theos, or as our theos, we can understand that they are connecting the Father with Yahweh. In short, Yahweh language is being attributed to the Father, so we can conclude that the Father is being identified with Yahweh. That's what I think the general thrust of the argument is kind of going on under the hood here, right? And at first glance, I think this sounds pretty reasonable. However, if this is the reasoning that undergirds Josh's arguments and the proof text that he cites, then it also gives us an equally powerful reason for saying that the New Testament identifies Jesus as Yahweh. Theos was not the only word first century Jews could use to refer to Yahweh. Another term was the Greek word kurios, which is translated as Lord. When the Old Testament was translated into Greek, places that originally contained the divine name Yahweh were rendered with kurios instead. Kurios became a substitute for the divine name. For a first century Jew, there was only one true kurios just as much as there's only one true theos. So when the New Testament authors refer to Jesus as kurios, I think by the same logic Josh would be using for the Father being called theos, we must then conclude that Jesus is also being identified with Yahweh. For the application of kurios to Jesus is just as much an application of Yahweh language as theos is. Now I know Josh has a response to this, right? His move is to say, oh no. In these instances, Jesus is not being identified with Yahweh. He's being called Yahweh in a metonymical sense. But here's the issue I see with that. Josh's claim there, I don't think is grounded in anything in the New Testament passages themselves. It is an interpretive decision that Josh makes, not because the text requires it or indicates it, but because his theological system requires it. And then what I think ends up happening is Josh ends up going through Scripture, and when Yahweh language is applied to the Father, Josh tells us those are identity statements. Those are clear identifications of the Father as Yahweh. But when the Yahweh language is used in application to the Son, then he dismisses it as merely metonymical. And I think this is entirely arbitrary. It's not based on the text. It's based on the pre-committed theology. So to kind of wrap this up, here's my challenge, I think, to you, Joshua. The way I see it, I think you have three options in front of you. Option one, I think you can give us a scriptural argument for explaining why all the Yahweh language about the Father should be taken as an identity, whereas all the Yahweh language about the Son should be dismissed as metonymical, right? And to do that, you would need to get into doing some exegesis with the text itself. Or option two, be consistent in your methodology and conclude that the Son is identified with Yahweh just as much as the Father is. Or option three, be consistent in your methodology, but in the opposite direction, and conclude that the Yahweh language applied to both the Father and Son, those aren't identity statements in either case. So I think those are your options. And just to be clear here, the issue I'm challenging Josh on here is his claim that the New Testament identifies the Father as Yahweh. I'm at this point, I'm picking one of the pillars that Josh uses to support his position, and I'm questioning the justification for that pillar. My internalist position doesn't stand or fall on this topic on whether or not Yahweh is identical to the Father, so I can go either way. But Josh's position, I think the stakes are high for him on this. So Josh, let's maybe look at some of your favorite proof texts. Maybe if you want, we could start at 1 Corinthians 8:6, something like that, and you can show me what you're thinking.
Okay. Yeah. So thank you very much for breaking that down and sort of putting forward some of my key arguments, key moves. I would say, I do very much believe that Jesus is Yahweh in the sense that he is metonymically Yahweh. That means that he's the representative and mediator between us and Yahweh. He's the agent of Yahweh, and that's why we can call him that. But when we are when we're using the word Yahweh in the sense of identifying that as a proper name, that is given to the Father alone. Now, your question was, well, how can you show that from the scriptures? Well, firstly, we can actually see that the Father is called Kyrios in the New Testament. So, for example, if you go to the Annunciation passages, I don't know if you can bring up, are you able to bring up verses, or is that something you can do?
Yeah, let me. I'll bring up my Logos Bible software if you want.
Okay. When you can you go to Luke 1:26-38?
Yeah, give me 1 second. It's just loading. And I also did not process which passage you just referred to.
Oh, sorry. So Luke 1:26-38. Luke 1:26-38.
I'm gonna actually switch my screen this way so that way it doesn't look weird when I share it though. 1 sec. There you go.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, so
I can get rid of this interlinear if you want me to.
Yeah, I think maybe for the audience it'll be easier having. Okay, I'll read it here, and then hopefully the audience can see. Or if you can read for me, actually, Fan, that'll be. So I don't
Yeah,
want to
26 to what verse?
Yeah, 26 to 30. That's the main. It's an Annunciation passage.
Yeah.
where
So in the
Mary's
6th
message.
month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man whose name was Joseph, of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary, and he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. Did you want me to keep reading?
Yeah, sorry, just go down to 32.
32?
Yeah.
The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God, and now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give him the throne of his ancestor David."
Okay, so James, just a quick question. Who would you identify the Kyrios being spoken about there?
So here in verse 31, and now you will see for the womb bear a son, he will be great, and he will be called the Son of the Most High, and the Lord God will give to him the throne. I think the Lord God there is referring to the Father giving him the throne of his ancestor David.
So we have here an identification of God with the Lord, or we can say with Kyrios. Now,
can I pause you there?
Yeah.
Yes. So you're interpreting this as an identity statement, as the Father is the Kyrios.
Just for now, I'm just showing you that.
Okay, I'll let you go ahead and cook.
I'm just showing you that there are verses where it's actually the Lord is spoken of the Father, because a lot of people think, and it's something that they raised before. They said, okay, we have loads of verses for Jesus being called the Lord, whereas actually the Father called the Lord. Well, you have in the beginning of Luke that's explicitly shown. Sorry, Than, just one more thing.
Yeah, of course.
Can you go to Matthew? It's a similar thing as well with Mary. Can you just go to Matthew 1? 18 to 18 to 23. But a specific verse will be 18 to 23.
Right.
The key verse there, though, if you can just read verse 20.
Yeah. But just when he had resolved to do this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, "Joseph, son of David, do not be afraid to take Mary as your wife, for the child conceived in her is from the Holy Spirit."
And sorry, verse 22 as well.
What did I just read?
Yeah.
Sorry, I had a dyslexic moment. Sorry.
Verse 22.
All of this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet.
And then, 23, that says, "Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, they shall call him Emmanuel," which means God is with us.
Oh, okay.
So again, James, who is that referring to when it speaks of, firstly, the angel of the Lord? So who is the Lord that the angel is of? And then secondly, when it says spoken by the Lord through the prophet, again, who is that referring to? Is that referring to the Son, or is it referring to...
Yeah, so I think angel of the Lord is their associating angel as a messenger of Yahweh. I don't think the Lord there is going to give you either the Son or the Father. I think this is general a reference to Yahweh there. Now, what was your other question about this?
When you go to 23 and it says spoken by the Lord through the prophet, so the Lord is speaking through the prophet and gives a specific message saying that the virgin will bear a son. Is that the Son speaking about himself?
Yeah, I don't see any. Yeah, so I actually think that we probably, and this could go into a deep stuff into the Old Testament. I think we do have grounds for thinking that it is the Son who speaks to the prophets in the Old Testament. So if you look at something like Isaiah or Jeremiah, when they have at the beginning of their kind of prophetic career, they talk about the word of the Lord coming to them. And I think that there's decent Old Testament grounds to understand the word of the Lord as referring to a visible manifestation of Yahweh, which I think both of us would agree visible manifestations of Yahweh are not going to be the Father. But so did you have any more you want to say about that?
No, because what I'm saying, I don't think that will make sense in this specific passage, because if it's the Son speaking, again, it says all that took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet, and then it quotes, "Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall call him Emmanuel." Now, if it's the Son, wouldn't there be a different type of reference that he gives to himself?
Can I ask a question real quick? So is the point that you're getting at here that Kyrios is applied to the Father? Is that like the gem?
Well,
that's
I'm
at
just
the end
saying
of
I can't see how it's applied to the Son. That's the key thing.
Okay, yeah. So that's what I'm asking. So let's suppose I grant this to you. So, okay, this is Kyrios is being applied to the Father here.
Yeah.
That's what you think justifies saying that all the Yahweh language and applied to the Father, that's identity statements, but all the ones applied to the Son is metonymical. Am I correct?
Oh no, not at all. We just started. So firstly, we've established a basis. What I'm trying to say to you is that he is called Kyrios in the New Testament. Okay?
Yeah, I agree with that. So tell me, let's pause there. Do you agree that the Son is called Theos?
Oh yes, I do.
Okay, so then we have a symmetry for both. Both the Father and the Son are called Theos. Both are called Kyrios. But, and I think you'll agree with me, Theos is usually reserved for the Father. Kyrios is usually reserved for the Son. But there's a little bit of overlap. On like the Venn diagram of usage, there's a bit of overlap. Theos, sometimes it's for the Son, but usually for the Father, and same thing with Kyrios.
I agree with you, but then we need to then interpret it and say, well, what does it mean when it's used for the Son? Theos. What does it mean?
Or both.
When Kyrios is used for the Father. And so I would say that I have grounds for saying when it's used for the Father, it cannot be metonymical. It cannot be representative. When it's used for the Son, it is representative, given our understanding of the role of the Son. So for example, now, let's say we go to, if you can just, sorry, I'll read the verses myself just because to save us a bit of time. But if we were to look at, for example, what is the role of the Son? The role of the Son that we see in 1 Timothy 2:5, it says that there's one God and one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. When we now go to the key verse, 1 Corinthians 8, so I will read that out. So we have 1 Corinthians 8, the very famous verse, 1 Corinthians 8:6, which says, yet for us there's one God the Father, from whom are all things, and for whom we exist, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we exist. Now, what is the prepositions in those specific statements? They're saying one is a source and one is a mediatorial being, because it says from whom all, and then through.
Can I pause you here real quick though? Yeah. Because I could grant you that the Father is the source of the Son. I could grant you eternal generation, and we can come back.
No, I'm not talking about that though. I'm not talking about that.
Okay, so let's say so the Father. So so then I'll let you continue.
I'm not talking about that. I'm saying because he's not talking about the relationship between the Father and the Son. He's talking about what is the relationship between God, the one God, and us, and the one Lord and us. Okay. Now, what does it say with the prepositional use? The prepositions that are used in 1 Corinthians 8 is from whom are all things and for whom we exist. So it's saying all things exist for him and our goal is him. Because then it says, as it says there, and for whom we exist. So our purpose is for the existence of the Father. But then when it speaks about the Lord, what does it say the prepositional use for him is? It doesn't repeat it and say, well, they're equally Yahweh, equally God, so it's equally from whom and equally for whom. No, it then says through whom are all things. So he's the means by which we exist, the means that the one God uses for us to exist, and then through whom we exist. And so the key point here, what I'm saying to you is, and other verses you can bring here is, what is the role of the Son? The Son is taken to be a mediator within the New Testament between God and humanity.
Yes.
Now, I'll just ask you this question, sorry.
So, just to be clear, the Son is seen as being as a mediator between humanity and the Father. I just want to be, because I want to remove ambiguity between using God as a reference to the Father and using God as a reference to Yahweh in general. Because the thing that I'm questioning here is about whether or not
well, I mean, if you just, I'm going with the verse. I'm going with the verses.
So let's walk through it. So what is
1
it?
Timothy 2:5 says one God and one mediator between God and man. So
I agree. So Theos there is being used in application to the Father. So is your argument about that? Yeah. So that is Yahweh language, but Yahweh language is applied to the Son. So if your argument from 1 Corinthians is like, look, this is saying we have this Yahweh language, Theos, being applied to the Father, I'm going to say yes, it is Yahweh language. It is being applied to the Father. But then I'm going to say we also have Yahweh language applied to the Son. And so and so what I'm questioning then is the justification between saying metonymical in one sense and not in the other. And it seems like, and let me correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like you're building the case that in 1 Corinthians 8:6, the the one of these is an identity statement merely because of the phrase after this about us being for one and us through one. Is that correct, that you're putting all of the one of these is an identity statement because of that phrase that comes afterwards?
No. If you understand what I've said correctly, what I'm saying to you is, what is the New Testament's witness about who is the representative in the relationship between the Father and the Son? Is it that the Father is a representative of the Trinity, God, the Son, the Spirit? Or is it that the Son is taken to be the representative of another? So what I'm saying to you is, let's say Yahweh language is used for the Father. Can that be anything but identity?
I don't see why it couldn't be metonymical as well.
So
it seems like...
Wait, hold on. Let me get what you're saying. So the Father can be a representative of some other...
Wait, so
entity.
Do you use metonymical to mean just representative of?
Well, I mean, it doesn't just have to be, but...
Okay, yeah, okay, so let me give an example. So, for instance, amongst other, like, theologians who hold a position that would say that Yahweh is the Trinity. So someone like William and Craig. Now, to be fair, Craig has been workshopping his position a bit, and so if he happens to watch this, maybe he would disagree with my language. But someone then, like, would say that the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, someone like Craig would say, or Haynes has said something along the lines of, we can predicate divinity to them because of, like, them participating in the Trinity, them being like, the language I would say is them being this part-whole relationship. So I would say the Father could be described and have Yahweh language applied to him if he's not identical to the Trinity, for the same reason that I think Yahweh language can be applied to the Son, even if he's not identical to Yahweh. It's because of the part-whole relationship that the person stands in to the Trinity, which is God. So let me maybe here's a way to think about this, right? So maybe here's where my concern is. When it comes to these Yahweh language passages, I see kind of 4 ways that we could interpret things. So one way is to say that when Yahweh language is applied to the Son and the Father, but those are both identity statements. I think neither one of us wants to affirm that, right? Because that would collapse the persons. I think we're on the same page with that. Okay, so we're not going to do that one, right? So then we have the option of saying that only one of these. We have 2 options, which would be saying only one of these is an identity statement, and the other one is metonymical, predicative, whatever. You could say that the Father is the identity statement and the Son is metonymical, or you could flip that and say that the Son is metonymical, or the Son is identity, the Father is predicative. I think it'd be really weird to say that the Son is the one who's an identity statement and the Father's. I think we'd agree that'd be kind of wacky. So I would remove that option as well.
Yeah.
So it seems like the 2 options that we have on the table is we could say the Father is identity while the Son is metonymical, or we could just say neither one of these is identity statements. Both of them are spoken in a metonymical or a predicative sense or something like that. And so it seems like for your argument to work, what you would need to do is you would need to remove the plausibility of taking the option that neither one of these is identity statements. So that's kind of where maybe that'll help, like, kind of.
Yeah, and I've got to be honest, that's very easy. So just let me get you right. So you're saying in your position that Yahweh is the Trinity. Is that what you're saying? And then you can predicate the term or the name Yahweh to the Father or the Son because the Father and the Son are parts of the Trinity. Is that what you're saying, if I'm correct?
So just to be clear, so I think there are 2 plausible ways, and I think there was very little. So I think I outlined 2 plausible positions that might be taken. One you could say is that the Father is Yahweh, like this is what you're saying. I could take that position and I could say the Son is a part of the Father, right? I could do something like that. In which case, if you were right, I would go with that option, right? And then we could have a talk there. But then the other way I could go is I could go the way that I think guys like Kirshner, Craig, Haskell, like they go. And they don't want to go with that, identifying the Father as Yahweh. They want to keep it more of like it's the Trinity that's Yahweh. So right now, right, I'm operating under this framework of like someone who wants to say the Trinity is Yahweh. That's what I'm operating under.
Okay.
And this is why I clarified that my position doesn't hinge on this, but I think yours does. And so this is, I think, a good position.
Yeah, James, I've got to be honest. I think your position is incoherent, and I'm going to explain why.
Biblically or philosophically?
Philosophically, but why it's. So, because what you were saying is you need to remove the plausibility of that option, and then it leaves my option on the table. And I'm just saying to you that I believe that can be done very easily.
Biblically, you can do that?
No. So you said plausibility. Now, plausibility.
No, I meant like exegetically, like it is a plausible exegetical option to take that. Like that's what I'm referring to there.
Yeah, but the issue that you have is if yours is incoherent at the beginning, then there's no point even doing any exegetical work. And what I'm saying is, I believe that your position is incoherent. And can I just spell out very quickly?
Yeah, just to be clear, my position is that neither one of these statements in the New Testament, either Yahweh language about the Father, Son, neither of those is identity statements. That's what you're saying is incoherent.
Okay. No. So just to get what I'm saying with your position, let's say we're operating with not the Father being the whole and the Son and the Spirit being the parts, but the whole being the Trinity, the Father, Son, and Spirit are the parts of the Trinity. Okay, let's go with that model that you're saying. We can go with the second one after.
Okay, gotcha.
Because I believe that they have the same problem. Let's go with the first one. And so what you're saying to me is, when I brought you passages saying that we should take the Son to be representative of Yahweh, the Father, because he fulfills a representative role throughout the scriptures. So as I said to you, 1 Timothy 2, it says that there's one God and one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. So we're saying that the role of the Son is as the mediator between us and God.
Wait, I want to pause there. Between us and Yahweh, or between us and the Father?
Well, I'm taking at the moment now Yahweh and God to be applicable to the Father.
But that's the problem. That's why I'm trying to be really careful about how we use Theos and Yahweh, because I think that passage you quoted from was it Titus or Timothy? Timothy. I think you quoted. I think it's saying that Jesus serves as the only intermediary between us and the Father. I think that's what that's saying. But because I don't think Theos is a unique identity statement referring to Yahweh like you do, it would be circular to assume that that's saying Jesus is the unique intermediary between the Son and Yahweh.
Sorry for interrupting, but please be as clear as possible. What does God apply to for you in the Trinity, and what does Yahweh apply to you in the Trinity? And what I mean by this, primarily. So not in a derivative form. What does it primarily apply to?
Yeah. So generally in our everyday language, when we talk about God as 21st century Christians, when we talk about New Testament Yahweh, stuff like that, I think generally, and I think you would actually probably agree with this, maybe, we talk about God in a way in which God has kind of used this broad term to refer to the Trinity as a whole, or Yahweh, the being who creates everything, right? We use it as a reference to this general being. But what I see is that in the New Testament, the word that is translated to God, Theos, it is used, as I think you will agree, more specifically to refer to one specific person, which is the Father. And so the concern I have is that in these conversations, when we look at an English translation where Theos is translated as God, we bring our conceptions of what God is in our philosophical models and our discourse, and we insert that into the text. And I think a lot of times we do that with the Old Testament as well. So that's something that Mike Heiser has fought against with Elohim in the Old Testament, right? People oh look, God's I was okay, let's talk about what Elohim is. And so that's why I want to make a distinction between in the New Testament, is Theos, is that identified with Yahweh, or is that a term that is used to refer to one person who is internal to Yahweh?
Okay, so what you're saying to me, what I'm going through you're saying, is that Yahweh is a different person from... So let's say we use the term the one God, which is used in the scriptures.
The one Theos? Yeah.
Yeah, the one Theos. So when we use that term, you're saying that is different. Whatever being that term refers to is different from the being that's referred to by Yahweh. Is that what you're saying, sorry?
So if the statement is in the New Testament passages and it says something like the one Theos. So your question is if I see Theos used in the New Testament, do I think that that's different than
No, I didn't say that, because I do agree with you. Theos is an ambiguous term, and I've always said that in my writings, my presentations. And what I normally say is at least there are two ways of understanding it. There's many different ways of understanding it. But when it's using the term the one or the God, Hotheos, you're saying whatever being that is referred to as Hotheos is different to the being that's referred to as Yahweh, in the Old Testament.
So... Sorry, could you run that by me? I have a quick question. Is it your position that Hotheos is always Yahweh the Father? Is that your position?
No. There are very, I would say, a handful of passages that applies to stuff.
Okay, so you mentioned the definite article there. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't what you're saying.
What I'm just saying is when it's used, when the one God is spoken of in the New Testament.
I think that's generally the Father.
That's the Father. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, when Yahweh is spoken of in the Old Testament, who is that picking out?
Yeah, so this is actually going to be one of my other areas that I want to talk with you about is Old Testament data, but I'll bracket most of it. I'll answer your question, then I'll bracket most of it. I think very often... Yeah, what's up?
just really quickly, in 10 minutes roundabout, we're probably gonna just do some super chats because they're starting to pile up.
Yeah, that's cool.
And once you're done with this point, James, it might be helpful for you guys just to quickly recap what happened in this conversation so far for the audience, because we've gone. The broad category is still here, but we're overlapping on a lot of technicalities here.
Okay, yeah.
So to help people track, let's after this part.
Okay, yeah. So when you look at Yahweh and how it's used in the Old Testament, like, so if there's a figure that's being spoken of or a person that's being spoken of and the word Yahweh is being used, there are numerous instances where we know the person being labeled as Yahweh is the Son, the second person of the Trinity. And this is my second objection. I'm really confident that we can conclude that, and I think actually patristic tradition is gonna demand that of you if you're want to like hold a patristic tradition. But I'll bracket most of my comments of that. But like Yahweh in the Old Testament is at least sometimes referring to the Son.
Primarily, who is it referring to? Because I'm not asking. Who is it sometimes useful? When we are speaking about, when we have, for example, the Shema being spoken of in the Old Testament and being given, who is that referring to?
I think it's, so if I had to say who is the prime person that's being referred to as Yahweh, and like who do the authors most often have in mind, I think they're most often thinking about the Son.
James, I've got to be honest,
I can justify that.
I'm confused about your position because
you can give me a raised eyebrow. That's not a refutation.
No.
I can clarify on that.
No. I'm just saying. I'm just really confused about what your position is. So, I can say very clearly. Primarily, when the word is used, when the word Yahweh is primarily used, or when the word God is primarily used, that picks out the Father. Okay.
In the New Testament,
however,
I agree.
I'm just saying in the biblical corpus, the person who is Yahweh is the Father. The person who is the one God is the Father. However, the Son can be called Yahweh and can be called God because of the nature he shares, the representative role that he fulfills. And that's why he can bear these names. That's what I'm saying. Now, obviously, then you have to then back this up and evidence it. Okay, that's a secondary point. What I'm trying to say first, for clarity purposes, what is actually your position? Who is the being? Because you would say, for me, I'm confused because you're saying to me, okay, Yahweh is the Son.
No, I have never set up an identity statement between Yahweh and the Son. I explicitly rejected that in my opening statement.
Okay, so
what I'm doing, wait, let me clarify. Let me clarify. Yeah, so this is like the who is Yahweh question. So I articulated in my opening that as a partialist, I could take one of two positions. One, I could say that the Father is Yahweh and so on and so forth, or I could say that Yahweh is not a who, it's a what. Yahweh is the three. Now, I want to make a clarifying remark. You say that throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament as a whole, Yahweh picks out the Father. What I'm going to say is absolutely not. Like, that is not tenable, and the only way you can make that claim is because you are just selectively ignoring the numerous instances in which we know it cannot be the Father. It cannot be the Father that appears to Abraham in Genesis 18. It cannot be the Father that appears to Moses in the burning bush in Exodus 3. It cannot be the Father that enters into the covenant between the pieces with Abraham. Like, all of those, which are foundational points in the story of Israel and their understanding of who Yahweh is, all of those are going to be the Son. And again, that is well represented in the patristic literature. And I know that's like we're cracking the lid of a big thing there. And so if Than wants to pause here, I have a lot of Old Testament data I would love to talk with you about. I tell you what, let's let Josh have the last word on this. Since I started the attack, let's let Josh have the last word, and then we can go to questions. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't say what you just said. I didn't say it picks out the Father over the Son. I'm happy to say that Yahweh is spoken of, or when we have various instances of Yahweh speaking to prophets, or even wrestling with individuals, whatever it is. These are representations of the Son. I have no problem with that. What I'm saying to you, however, that doesn't negate the point that we get from the New Testament, because as a Christian, what I would say that the interpretive lens is we look to the Old Testament in light of the New Testament. And what the New Testament reveals to us, I would say, is that you have the Father being the individual who has sent the Son as his representative. And so then we can understand then, when the Son is operating within the Old Testament, what is he operating as? Is he operating as this independent entity, or is he still fulfilling what he was doing in the New Testament, which was to be the representative of the Father, which was to do the will of the Father, not his own will? Who, again, so my point is that we look to the old in light of the new, and so we see from the new that the Father is the being who is revealed by the Son. He is the God of Israel. That seems to be what Jesus is painting the picture of, that it is the God of Israel, that he has come to fulfill his will. And so then what does that mean for them when the God of Israel was interacting with the Israelites in the Old Testament? So for me, what I'm saying is, even if I grant you, yes, the Son is the person who appears in the Old Testament in all of these Yahweh instances, that doesn't mean that he is Yahweh by identity. It still fits exactly with my position, because what I'm trying to say to you is the representative role is the key thing here. What we see very, very explicit in the New Testament is that the Son is the mediator between us and God. And so we access God through the Son. So when we go to the Old Testament, of course the prophets are going to be interacting with the Son, because again, he doesn't stop being the mediator between God and humanity, and he is the representative of God and humanity. So for me, it doesn't sort of evidence your position, just saying that we have the Son being picked out in the Old Testament and not the Father. Sorry, Vanya, over to you.
All right, settle down, ladies. Settle down.
We can barely hear you, Mike.
Yeah, it's because my mic was in front of me. I forgot.
Settle up, lady.
I will say this, because this can get really deep in the weeds really quickly if we're gonna get into like the Hebrew Bible, with the theophanies. I don't know if you guys want to go there or not, but
I fully plan to go there.
Okay. Well, let's get to some super chats here, then you guys can jump back in. And just try to answer these as briefly as possible, because we got a lot. So I guess this is for Dr. Sijuwadi. How does essence, nature, and substance differ?
Yeah, so in essence is something which is the whatness of a being, so it's expressed by a real definition. So for example, if someone says, what is your essence? You're basically saying, what are you? So what it is the whatness of that being, it is then expressed by a real definition. So you'll give a definition of that being. So for example, what is Socrates? Well, Socrates is a rational animal. And so that would be his essence, being a rational animal. Nature is the collection of properties which contribute to the whatness of an entity. So that will be things like rationality. So it will just be properties that you list, which will make up a collection, which will then allow us to understand what that being is. And the substance is just a particular object. So, for example, a table is a substance, a chair is a substance. It's just a particular object. If you take an Aristotelian view, you'll also say it has independence. So normally a substance is something which is an independent particular object. So yeah, there are different ways of understanding it, but that's normally the ways that I take it philosophically.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't what Joshua is saying simply the orthodoxical view? Or am I misunderstanding something?
Orthodoxical.
I think you meant orthodox. Yes.
I would say it is. I know there's been some people pushing back saying, oh, what is your saying that the Orthodox don't seem to like this. But it is exactly the Orthodox view. I'm not saying anything different. Now, I've got a paper coming out, hopefully very soon, which sort of gives the reasons why I became Orthodox. And I go through a list of probably about 10, 12 theologians who affirm this same position as myself. On monarchy of the fathers. So for me, it's just is the Orthodox view. Maybe I might use different philosophical language sometimes, but I don't see it's any different from what Orthodox will affirm generally, given the conciliar position.
You know, Joshua, every time you say that, I can hear Catholics crying in the distance.
I think so, man.
So I'll make one comment as a teaser for maybe something to talk about later on. I think that if we look at the earliest like patristic writers.
Yeah.
I think they more fall in line of the second option that I presented, which is the Father is identical to God. The Father is identical to Yahweh, and then the Son is a part of Yahweh. I think that's what we see in the earliest patristic writers, and I plan on bringing that up later, so maybe we could just have a teaser there.
How do begotten of and proceeding from differ?
Good question.
Yeah, so I've got an article on this. It came out a few years ago with Faith and Philosophy. It's called Grounding and Eternal Generation. So generally, the theological position is that we just don't know. It's a mystery. I think the Cappadocians even themselves said that there is no way really to understand it. I think Cappadocians won't be happy because I tried to actually try and understand it. And so I would say that, well, Catholics will say maybe the way to understand it is through the filioque. So you have the begetting just means that there is a soul generation. And then the proceeding is that there is a cooperative generation such that the Son proceeds from the Father through the Son and the Son. I would take the position similar to that I think the only way to really make sense of it is that there has to be some sort of there is sort of participation of the Son in the generation of the Spirit, but I wouldn't go the whole filioque route. And so that if someone wants to look into this, look into the paper Grounding in Eternal Generation. But I would say that probably the best way to understand it is saying that there is some aspect of the Son being involved in the procession of the Spirit.
This is a two-part super chat, so I think I may misunderstand what it means that Jesus is begotten. The language of begottenness is used in the Old Testament when Yahweh appoints his king. Monogenesis is also used in Greek to describe Isaac. In context, monogenes likely means unique. This can also be said of Jesus being unique compared to the other dons of God.
I'll jump in here and say this. I agree that monogenes that's generally understood as being like unique, and so there is an issue there. So one of the issues I want to raise later, I mean, like it would be kind of a sidetrack to go now. I do want to bring up the topic of does the Bible support eternal generation, and how did the earliest writers think about the begottenness of the Son, stuff like that, after the New Testament. But I will just say that on this point, I think this comment is correct. Monogenes is not a word that has these concepts in it of being first begotten. It can mean first unique, things along those lines. Or it could have to do with like the king when he is inaugurated.
Great question, and the answer depends on what you mean by no, and which Jewish communities you're talking about. 1,000 years ago, circa 1025 CE. TLDR, most Jews 1,000 years ago would have known that God refers to Yahweh, but they would not have pronounced it, and would refer to him instead as Adonai, or another title in speech and prayer. The Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, was known in writing and theology, but treated with great reverence. Here's the context. 1. By 1025 CE, the name Yahweh was no longer spoken aloud. The practice of not pronouncing Yahweh goes back to at least the Second Temple period, 500 BCE to 70 CE. The name was still written in scrolls, especially in the Torah and prayer books. But when reading aloud, Jews would say Adonai, Lord, in its place. In informal speech, Jews might even use softer substitutes like Hashem, the name. Jewish education and culture in 1025 CE. Literacy in Hebrew was strong among male scholars, rabbis, and readers of Torah. Most learned Jews would have recognized Yahweh as God's true name, even if not spoken. In major centers like Babylonia, North Africa, Spain, and parts of Europe, rabbinic tradition was thriving. The Masoretes, working 7th to 10th centuries, were preserving exact pronunciation rules, including the vowel pointing that replaced Yahweh with Adonai vowels. Kabbalistic traditions, just beginning to form around this time, also emphasized the mystical power of Yahweh, often associating it with cosmic structure, not just identity. 3. Terminology in practice. Term, meaning, spoken aloud? The divine name, replaced by Adonai, my Lord, in prayer. Elohim, God, generic term, used regularly in everyday talk. So would they have known God, Iku Yahweh? Yes, especially in a liturgical, textual, or theological sense. No, if you mean did they say Yahweh aloud or think of God as primarily named that. In lived experience, Adonai was God's practical name. Bonus, why the silence? The silence around the name reflects deep reverence. Jewish thought holds that God's essence is beyond naming, and that the true name is too holy for ordinary lips. In a way, it points to God's ineffability. You know who he is, but you don't try to possess him by speaking the name. As Exodus 3 verse 14 has it, I am who I am. The name names a presence, not just a sound. Would you like a breakdown of how this compares to Christian usage of the name, or how it shows up in the Dead Sea Scrolls versus Masoretic tradition? Yes, many educated Jews 1,000 years ago would have understood that Yahweh signifies something like necessary being, though probably not in exactly those philosophical terms. Here's how that understanding would have been present, even if not formalized as in later scholastic language. Theological meaning of in Jewish thought by 1025 CE. 1. The name itself. Yah, rooted in the Hebrew verb haya ea, to be. Most Jewish scholars understood Yahweh to express being itself, or the one who causes to be, or existence in its fullness. This goes back to Exodus 3:14. Ahaya asher ahaya, I am who I am, or I will be what I will be. So even without formal philosophical language, the biblical name already points to God as self-existent, eternal and uncaused, what a philosopher would call necessary being. 2. Medieval Jewish thinkers, 10th, 12th C. Saadia Gaon, 882 to 942. Foundational Jewish philosopher who spoke of God as uncaused, eternal and unique, drawing from Aristotelian and Neoplatonic philosophy. Baya ibn Pakud and Solomon ibn Gabirol also described God as existence itself, as a necessary simple being, though within a Jewish framework. This tradition culminates in Maimonides, 1135 to 1204, who makes it explicit. God is the only necessary being whose essence is existence itself. So by 1000 CE, educated Jewish scholars in centers like Babylonia and Al-Andalus would certainly understand Yahweh to imply necessary being, even if laypeople just thought of it as the name of the God of our fathers. Summary. Group, would they understand Yahweh as necessary being? Notes, to be. Ordinary Jews. Partially, God is eternal and self-naming, would associate it with I am, power, mystery. Rabbis, yes, especially midrashically, often tied Yahweh to the verb to be and God's eternity. Philosophers, e.g. Saadia, later Maimonides, definitely, explicitly articulate God as necessary being. Key insight. Even before philosophical formalism, the name Yahweh already expresses what later thinkers called aseity, self-existence, immutability, and necessary being. The Jewish reverence for the name was itself an intuitive acknowledgement that this God is not one being among others, but being itself. Would you like a breakdown of how Christian or Islamic thinkers interpreted this same concept around the same time?
begotten, so on and so forth.
He also has monogenes unique in Genesis 22:2. Remember, Isaac isn't Abraham's only son, but his unique son who was appointed as the inheritor of the promise. Okay. Dr. Sijuwati, Mullins claims your view of the Trinity makes all divine properties extrinsic due to your extrinsic criteria for aseity. How do you respond?
I can't actually remember Mullins' critique here, but I would generally say that no, I don't believe that it does, just because the way in which something like being ungrounded is very different from the property of being omnipotent or being omniscient. Mm-hmm. And so when we say that the Father is ungrounded, ungroundedness already within it presupposes a lack of a relation to something else. So it still has an outward lookingness to it. It's just basically saying we look around the let's say environment in which the Father exists, and there is nothing out there that grounds him. Okay, but with omnipotence, you don't look outwards from in the environment. You just look to the internal being of the Father. Oh, I'm all powerful. That has nothing to do with my relation or lack thereof with something else. Oh, I'm omniscient. Again, that has nothing to do with my relation to anything outside myself. So being unbegotten, being ungrounded, being uncaused is still something which has to do with how the environment is. And thus it's extrinsic, because it's saying there is a lack of a relationship of causation or grounding with something else. But you don't have that with all the other properties. So you can easily say they are intrinsic, but extrinsicness is. And I before I even started writing on this, when I had the idea, this was years ago when I started writing on this, I went and sort of started asking a few philosophers who have nothing to do with philosophy of religion, but were working on the intrinsic distinction. And I said, oh, is being uncaused an extrinsic relation? And they just said, duh, of course it is. And like, this was nothing, they have nothing at all to do with the Trinity. And so then I was like, okay, that's great. Let me start thinking about this deeper. So it's not just like, oh, I've just plucked it out of thin air. It's actually something which, when really thought through with the intrinsic distinction, you'll see very clearly that it has to be an extrinsic property, but the others aren't.
All right, I'm gonna do one more.
Can I make a quick comment on that? So Ryan Mullins talks about that in his more recent book, Divine Time Maker and Divine Watchmaker. And Mullins develops an argument where he takes I think it's 4 criteria of intrinsicality that you put forth, and he shows that if we apply those criteria consistently against these other properties, they end up being extrinsic. I'm not going to develop that argument here. I'm just saying if people want to hear more about Mullins on that, that's what you would find.
Okay, that's great.
All right, yesterday's super chat. Exact location of the One Piece is known, but super hard to find and land. When found, we'll have the true Trinity concept. You see,
I heard that the real Injil actually has the correct model of the Trinity in it too.
That's true. It does. Just so you guys know, the
So when you're talking about One Piece, is it the anime story?
I don't know. Some people just do stuff in the super chats. We have no idea.
I've heard like there's.
Wait, Josh. Are you into anime?
Yeah, just Dragon Ball. That's it. I've limited myself.
Okay, no.
How have we been friends this long and I did not know that?
No, only Dragon Ball. Dragon Ball.
My kids and I are watching through Daimo right now.
How do you find it?
It's fun. It's fun. I like it.
I like it.
I'm sorry.
Okay, guys. Let's get back on topic.
We can talk about this another time. Yeah. But yeah.
All right. All right. So yeah. All right. Ready? Round 2. Fight.
So I think this might be a good point. So
why did you do this one, Mike? Sorry.
Sorry.
Really quickly. Yeah. Really quickly. Because we went over biblical data, largely speaking, and the identity statements and all that kind of stuff. Are you guys wanting to continue that conversation?